My mother-in-law spent 2 years erasing every trace of what she did to her husband's estate. She was good at it. She almost got away with it. What she forgot is that I don't need paper to remember. 14 years of federal investigations teaches you that people leave a trail even when they're sure they've burned every page. I heard the silence fall the second I set that folder down on her coffee table and nobody reached for it. Judith was still smiling. She'd been smiling since the day of her husband's funeral, the kind of smile built to end a conversation before it started. But her hand, resting on the arm of her chair, had gone still, and I recognized that stillness from 100 interview rooms. It isn't calm. It's the second before someone realizes the floor isn't there anymore. "Alexandra," she said, with that practiced warmth she used whenever she wanted the room to remember she was the one being wronged. "I don't know what you think you found. I don't know what you think you found." "I don't think anything, Judith." I kept my hands folded in my lap. 14 years as a federal agent teaches you the person who raises their voice first usually loses the room. "I know." Benjamin stood by the window, arms crossed, not looking at me. My husband had spent his whole life keeping peace in that house, and I was about to take it from him in front of everyone he loved. Claire's phone sat forgotten in her lap, her face pale. The family attorney had stopped writing on his legal pad. "People only remember," Judith said quietly, the line I'd heard her use before, the one she pulled out whenever she needed to remind a room who was really in charge, the version of the truth that's left standing. I almost smiled, because for the first time in 2 years, that sentence didn't scare me anymore. That's where the story ends. It's not where it starts. Before we go back to the beginning, if you're new here, welcome. I tell true family stories, the kind with real stakes and real consequences, and if that's your thing, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss how this one unfolds. Now let's go back to where it actually began, 2 years earlier, before I had any idea what was coming. My name is Alexandra Pierce. I spent most of my adult life as a special agent with the FBI, working white-collar cases, the kind where powerful people move money in circles until they're sure nobody can follow it. I'm patient. I don't get emotional about evidence, because evidence doesn't care how you feel about it. At home, I was somebody else entirely. I had to be. Benjamin and I had been married 9 years, an engineer, steady and kind, married to a woman who spent her days taking apart other people's lies for a living. We had a quiet life, Sunday dinners, a mortgage, a golden retriever named Scout who thought every doorbell was the end of the world. I never let my job follow me home. Home was where I stopped being an investigator and started being a wife. I used to think that was the secret to a long marriage, knowing which version of yourself to leave at the door. I didn't know yet that the day would come when leaving her outside would almost cost me everything. That day started with a phone call about Benjamin's father. Robert Pierce built a logistics company out of a single delivery van and never let success change how he treated people. I'd known him 7 years, and he'd always been kind to me the plain, unshowy way people are when they mean it. 4 years before he died, he'd had a bad scare. Chest pains that put him in the hospital for 3 days and frightened the whole family enough that he started talking, seriously, about getting his affairs in order. He recovered. He seemed fine. We all let ourselves stop worrying. His heart gave out for good faster than anyone predicted. Judith took his death exactly the way she took everything, with a composure that impressed people who didn't know her well. "Your father wanted everything simple," she told Benjamin, less than 3 weeks after the funeral. "No drawn-out process, no lawyers picking through our life like vultures. He trusted me to handle it, and I have." I sat at that dinner table and watched my husband nod, relieved to have one less thing to manage while he was grieving. I didn't say anything. Judith had been running this family for 35 years. I'd been part of it for 9. I told myself staying quiet was respect. Looking back, it was fear wearing respect's clothes. The first crack showed up at a Sunday dinner about a month later, the kind of ordinary evening where nobody expects anything to matter. I still can't find that email Dad sent about the beneficiary stuff, Claire said, passing the potatoes without looking up. The one from after his heart scare. I've looked everywhere. I never got a copy either, Judith said smoothly, refilling her wine. I think that whole conversation happened before I was even copied on the family account. Across the table, a cousin mentioned almost as an afterthought that the accountant who'd handled Robert's books for over a decade had suddenly retired the month after the funeral and stopped returning calls. Judith laughed lightly and said something about how nobody could blame the man for wanting to finally relax. Then, like she was mentioning the weather, she added that a pipe had burst in the garage back in the spring and ruined several boxes of old financial paperwork. Honestly, it was for the best, she said, cutting her chicken. Half of it was decades old anyway. Nobody at that table so much as blinked. I did. Any one of those things alone means nothing. People lose emails. Accountants retire. Pipes burst. I've built a career understanding that coincidence is real and that most people who look guilty are only disorganized. But I don't work with one data point. I work with patterns. And by the third mention in under 10 minutes, a small professional part of my brain, the part I'd spent 9 years deliberately keeping out of my marriage, quietly opened a file. I told myself I was imagining things, that grief makes families sloppy, that I was letting my job poison something that didn't deserve suspicion yet. Benjamin needed a wife right now, not an agent cataloging his mother's inconsistencies. So I stayed quiet, and I watched, and every week something else didn't add up. Robert's storage unit, the one that held years of the company's archived records, got cleared out by Judith herself, alone, less than 10 days after the funeral. His longtime IT consultant, the man who'd set up his home office years earlier, mentioned it to me at a summer barbecue like it was a funny little errand. Judith had asked him, before Robert was even in the ground, how to permanently delete an old email account. He laughed when he told me, I didn't. I just filed it away with everything else, the way you file away a face you know you've seen before but can't place yet. The trust documents Judith eventually did produce were dated strangely, revised just 4 months before Robert died, during a stretch when, by every account, his health had been declining and long conversations about paperwork weren't something he'd had the energy for. When I gently asked Benjamin if that timeline made sense to him, something shifted in his face I'd never seen before. Not suspicion. Discomfort. Like I'd asked him to referee a fight he'd spent his whole life avoiding. Can we not do this right now? He asked. She'd just lost her husband. He wasn't wrong. But he wasn't right, either. It was at Robert's memorial gathering, 6 weeks after the funeral, the extended family finally all in one room, that everything shifted for good. I hadn't planned to say anything. I promised myself I wouldn't. But Claire cornered me quietly by the kitchen island and asked, in a low voice, whether I thought it was strange that 3 separate people couldn't locate the same email. I told her the truth. I said patterns like that usually aren't accidents. I didn't know Judith was standing in the doorway. Patterns, Judith repeated, loud enough that the room went quiet around her the way rooms always did around her. She set her wine glass down with a small, precise click. Is that what we're calling it now? My daughter-in-law investigating my husband's death like it's one of her cases? Judith, that's not. I buried my husband of 41 years, she said, and her voice cracked in exactly the right place, exactly the right amount. And instead of grieving with this family, Alexandra has spent 6 weeks treating all of us like suspects. Every eye in that room turned toward me. Not toward her. Toward me. I never said that, I told her, keeping my voice level even as my chest tightened. I asked a question. You interrogated my sister. I asked Claire a question at a kitchen counter. Judith's eyes filled. right on cue, and I watched 35 years of careful reputation do exactly what it was built to do. An aunt reached over and squeezed her shoulder. A cousin gave me a look I'd never been on the receiving end of in this family before, something close to disgust. Benjamin crossed the room and stood beside his mother, and for one unbearable second, I understood exactly how alone I was about to be. He didn't defend her out loud. He didn't have to. He just stood there, and that was enough. I didn't argue. I've spent my whole career learning that the moment you defend yourself too hard, you look guilty. So I told her I was sorry the conversation had upset her, and I let it go, and I drove home that night telling myself I'd done the right thing by staying calm. It didn't feel like the right thing. It felt like watching a door close from the wrong side. Over the following weeks, the calls from Benjamin's family got shorter. Claire stopped mentioning the missing email at all. An aunt who used to text me recipes went quiet. Nobody said it outright, but I understood the message underneath it. Alexandra can't turn it off. Alexandra sees a crime everywhere she looks. Alexandra doesn't know how to just be family. Benjamin and I didn't fight about it. That almost made it worse. We just stopped talking about his mother entirely, the way you stop touching a bruise, hoping that not naming the pain will make it heal faster. Then, 3 months after the memorial, I got a call from the family's estate attorney. He needed a document Judith had told him didn't exist, bank records tied to an account Robert had opened the year before he died. Judith said it had been closed for years, but I'd seen a statement briefly sitting on Robert's desk the last Thanksgiving he was alive. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table long after Benjamin had gone to bed, and I finally let myself see what I'd been refusing to see for months. This wasn't grief making people forgetful. This wasn't ordinary chaos after a death in the family. Someone had been erasing a trail, carefully, deliberately, one document, one account, one convenient accident at a time. And the only person with the access, the motive, and the composure to do it without raising suspicion for this long was sitting at that table every Sunday, pouring the coffee, asking me how work was going. I thought about Benjamin's face at the memorial. I thought about a family already closing ranks around her and how easily they'd turned one honest question into proof that I was the problem. If Judith had really erased every trace of what happened to her husband's estate, I had no idea how I was supposed to prove the truth without losing the only family I had left. But I knew one thing for certain, sitting there in the dark. I wasn't imagining it anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until almost 4 a.m, laptop open, Scout's head resting heavy on my foot, going through 9 years of forwarded emails and old attachments, anything with Robert's name on it that might still exist somewhere I hadn't thought to look. I told myself I wasn't investigating. I was just organizing my thoughts. That was a lie I needed to believe for about a week. By the following weekend, I'd stopped pretending. I opened a folder on my personal laptop, separate from anything connected to the bureau. No badge, no case number, no access I wasn't entitled to as a private citizen and a member of this family. Just me, a legal pad, and whatever I could get honestly. I found out fast how little there actually was. The accountant's number had been disconnected. His firm's website redirected to a general contractor's page, like the business had simply stopped existing. I drove 40 minutes to the storage facility where Robert had kept the company's old records, and the property manager met me at the gate with an apologetic look I still remember. "Your mother-in-law came herself," he said, checking a clipboard he didn't need to check. "Real polite lady, paid cash for the extra disposal fee. Cleared the whole unit out back in the spring. Nothing left in there now but dust. Every door I tried had already been closed, and closed carefully weeks before I'd even started looking." I brought it to Benjamin on a Tuesday night, gently, the way you bring up something you already know will hurt. I laid out the disconnected number, the empty storage unit, the accountant nobody could reach. He listened. He always listened. That was the maddening part. Maybe he wanted to retire quietly. Benjamin said. Maybe Mom cleared the unit because it was full of Dad's old company junk and it hurt too much to look at. Benjamin. 3 separate things don't disappear at once by accident. Or maybe you're looking for a pattern because that's what you're trained to do. His voice wasn't cruel. That was almost worse. It was tired. Alex, I can't lose my mother and referee this at the same time. I need you to let it breathe. I let it breathe. I stopped bringing it to him at all. I didn't stop working. 2 weeks later, Judith hosted a lunch to plan her sister's 70th birthday. I found out about it from a group text Claire sent 3 days after the fact. I'd never been added to the thread that actually planned it. When I asked Benjamin if he'd heard anything, he went quiet and admitted his mother had asked him to come alone. She said it'd be less tense, he told me, just this once. It wasn't just once. Over the following month, invitations that used to include both of us started arriving addressed to Benjamin only, or not arriving at all. Nobody said the words out loud. Judith didn't mean to ban me from anything. She just had to make everyone else a little more comfortable without me there and let the silence do the rest. I sat home alone more Sundays than I want to admit, telling myself I didn't care, while my husband went to dinners at his mother's table and came back unable to meet my eyes. That's when I stopped being careful about what I was willing to feel. I went back to the emails, the one Robert had sent the family after his first cardiac scare, the one about updating his beneficiary designations, the one everyone swore had vanished. My copy was gone too, deleted from my own inbox, which meant this hadn't just disappeared from Judith's records. Someone had gone into multiple accounts. But deleted isn't the same as gone. I know that better than almost anyone. I spent 3 nights relearning things I hadn't touched since a financial crimes rotation 7 years earlier. How mail servers hold on to deleted items longer than people think. How metadata survives even when the file itself doesn't. I found the header information still sitting in my account's archive settings. The email had been sent once, in October, 4 years before Robert died. It had been deleted from 3 separate accounts, but not on the same day. Mine went first, then Claire's, 10 days later. Then, 6 weeks after that, a version disappeared from a shared family drive Robert had set up years earlier so everyone could access old vacation photos and holiday cards, a drive Judith had clearly forgotten still existed because she'd never bothered to purge it. That wasn't one accident. That was 3 separate decisions, spaced out over almost 2 months, made by someone being careful not to do it all at once and draw attention. For the first time since the memorial, I felt something other than grief. I felt certain. The old family drive gave me more than I expected. Buried in a folder labeled Dad's Files 2019, there was a scanned image Robert had uploaded himself. A partial screenshot of an account statement, cut off at the edges, the kind of thing you save on your phone and forget about. An account number. A balance. A bank I didn't recognize, in a branch 2 towns over. I called the branch the next morning, not as an agent, just as family, asking if they still had archived statements tied to an account under Robert's name. Most banks purge records after 7 years. This one hadn't, not entirely, because the account had technically never been formally closed, just drained down to nothing and left dormant. What I found waiting for me in that paperwork should have felt like a win. It felt like an accusation. Transfers? Going back years before Robert's health even started declining. Money moving in patterns that didn't match anything Judith had claimed. I brought copies to Benjamin that weekend, hopeful, stupidly hopeful, that hard numbers would finally cut through where conversation couldn't. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just looked at the pages for a long time and said, "Where did you even get this?" I called the bank. You called the bank. He rubbed his face. "Alex, that's my father's private financial history. You went digging into it behind everyone's back. I asked a question I had every right to ask. You went around my mother." Again. Something cracked in my chest, quiet and total, the way ice breaks under weight you didn't know was too much. "Benjamin, I'm not doing this to hurt you. It doesn't matter why you're doing it," he said. "Look at what it's doing to us." That was the night I stopped believing the truth would fix anything on its own. The following weeks were the worst of my life, and I say that as someone who has stood in rooms with people who'd hurt others badly enough to end up in federal custody. This was different. This wasn't a stranger's cruelty. This was my own family, one relative at a time, deciding I was the problem in a story where I hadn't invented a single fact. Judith requested, through the estate attorney, that I no longer be included in any discussion regarding her late husband's affairs, citing my clear conflict of interest as a federal agent. It didn't matter that I hadn't used a single bureau resource. It didn't matter that I only ever asked questions any daughter-in-law had the right to ask. The label stuck because she said it with enough confidence, and confidence, I was learning, could outrun evidence every single time. Claire called once to apologize for going quiet, then never called again. I found out later it was because Judith had put a hold on the small distribution Robert had left for Claire's daughter's college fund, citing pending clarification of estate matters, a delay that only started after I began asking questions. Claire never said it was my fault. She didn't have to. I watched a woman who used to text me recipes start choosing her words around me like she was walking on ice, because now the cost of my curiosity wasn't just mine to carry anymore. A cousin who'd been counting on his share of Robert's old truck, a small, sentimental thing, worth almost nothing on paper, got a letter saying the vehicle's title was still being located. He texted me, half joking, asking if I'd started a family war over a 12-year-old Ford. I didn't have the heart to tell him I thought I had. Benjamin started sleeping later on the couch some nights, telling me he didn't want to keep me up while he worked. We both knew that wasn't the truth. I remember standing in my own kitchen on a Thursday night in October, holding a mug of coffee I'd stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier, and thinking, clearly and calmly, that maybe I should stop, not because I was wrong, because I understood, finally and completely, that being right wasn't going to be enough to save what I actually cared about saving. I could keep gathering proof until I had a filing cabinet full of it, and I would still lose Benjamin, still lose this family, one relative at a time, while Judith stood in the middle of the wreckage looking like the only reasonable person left standing. I almost deleted the folder that night. My hand was actually on the trackpad. What stopped me was one line item in the bank records I hadn't fully looked at yet. A wire transfer from 4 years before Robert's death, routed through an intermediary account I didn't recognize, to a name I did. Diane Foster. Robert's executive assistant for almost 20 years, retired long before I'd ever met the family, a woman I'd only heard mentioned once or twice at holiday dinners. I found her through an old company directory Robert had scanned into that same forgotten family drive. She still lived 40 minutes away. When I called her, cautious, unsure what I was even hoping for, she answered on the second ring like she'd been waiting for someone to ask. "I always wondered if anyone would come asking about that," she said quietly. I told Robert at the time I didn't feel right notarizing something he clearly didn't have the energy to read all the way through. He told me not to worry about it. Said Judith would explain everything to the family when the time came. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the phone pressed hard against my ear, and listened as an 81-year-old woman with a clear memory and no reason to lie for anyone confirmed, piece by piece, a version of events that lined up exactly with the timestamps, exactly with the wire transfer, exactly with everything I'd spent months collecting in the dark while my own family decided I couldn't be trusted. She remembered the date because it was the same week her granddaughter was born. She remembered Robert's hands shaking when he tried to sign, and Judith standing behind him telling him where to initial. She remembered thinking at the time that it wasn't her business and carrying that small discomfort quietly for years because saying something out loud had never seemed worth the trouble it would cause. "I'm glad someone finally asked," she said, before we hung up. This wasn't one bad decision made in grief. This wasn't Judith protecting her husband's wishes. This was years, plural, deliberate, built slowly enough that no single moment ever looked suspicious on its own, which was exactly why it had worked for as long as it had. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen in the dark, and for the first time in months, the exhaustion in my chest wasn't despair. It was the particular, dangerous calm of someone who finally has enough to prove what she already knew. The only question left was whether I could get the truth in front of the people who loved Judith before she convinced them, permanently, that I was the one who couldn't be trusted at all. I didn't call Benjamin first. I called the attorney. His name was Warren Cole, and he'd handled Robert's affairs long before I'd ever sat at that family's table. I remembered him mentioning, months earlier, that Judith had told him a certain bank account had been closed for years, the same account I now had 6 months of statements for, sitting dormant and very much open, 2 towns over. "I need to send you something," I told him over the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need you to look at it as an attorney, not as a friend of the family." He was quiet for a long moment after he opened the file. "Alexandra," he finally said, "where did you get bank records I was told don't exist?" I asked the bank a question I had every right to ask. The same question you asked Judith 3 months ago and never got an answer to. Another silence. Longer this time. "Send me everything," he said. "All of it tonight." I stayed up until 2 in the morning organizing it, not as accusations, not as a story, just as a timeline. Dates, names, documents next to the dates they were altered. Emails next to the 3 separate days they'd been deleted from 3 separate accounts. Diane Foster's statement, typed up exactly the way she'd told it to me, with her phone number attached so anyone could call and hear it themselves. I didn't write a single sentence that said, "Judith did this on purpose." I let the dates say it. Dates don't have motives. They just tell you what happened, an order, whether you want to hear it or not. Warren called me back 2 days later. "I've asked Judith to attend a formal meeting with the immediate family," he said, "to review outstanding questions about the estate before we finalize distribution. I didn't tell her what I have. I want her to answer to the facts, not to a warning. She'll say it's an ambush. It's not an ambush if it's the truth," he said. "It's just the truth she wasn't expecting." I told Benjamin that night. Not with pages this time. I sat across from him at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd built this whole case alone for months, and I told him everything, start to finish, in order, the way I'd give it to anyone who needed to actually understand instead of just needing to feel better. I told him about Diane Foster's voice cracking when she described his father's hands shaking. I watched something in my husband's face come apart, quietly, the way a dam doesn't break all at once. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he reached across the table and put his hand over mine, and for the first time in months, I let myself cry in front of him. "I kept telling myself you were choosing your job over this family," he said finally. "I never once asked what it was costing you to keep doing it anyway. I wasn't investigating your family, Benjamin. I was trying to save it. I know that now." His voice broke. I should have known it in October. He didn't fix it that night. He couldn't. But he showed up to that meeting standing beside me instead of beside her, and that alone felt like something I'd stopped believing I'd ever get back. The meeting was set for the following Sunday at Judith's house, in the same living room where she'd hosted every holiday for 35 years. Claire came. A few cousins came, curious and uneasy, sensing something they couldn't name yet. Warren came with a leather folder of his own. I brought mine. Judith greeted everyone at the door like she was hosting a garden party, and for a moment, watching her smile and pour coffee and ask Claire's daughter about school, I understood exactly why this had worked on everyone for so long. She wasn't performing warmth. She believed it. She believed, completely, that whatever she'd done had been owed to her, earned across 4 decades of building this family exactly the way she thought it needed building. We sat down. Warren opened the meeting by stating, plainly, that several documents relevant to Robert's estate had come to light that conflicted with information previously provided. Judith's smile didn't move. "I'm not sure what documents you mean." I set the folder on the coffee table. Nobody reached for it. "Not yet." "Alexandra," Judith said, and her voice had that practiced warmth, the one she used when she wanted to remind everyone she was the one being wronged. "I don't know what you think you found." "I don't think anything, Judith." I kept my hands folded in my lap, the way I'd sat across from men who'd stolen far more than this and believed, right up until the handcuffs, that they'd never be caught. "I know." I walked through it slowly, not with anger. I'd learned months ago that anger was a gift I couldn't afford to give her. It was exactly the reaction she knew how to use. I laid out the timestamps, the 3 separate deletions, 10 days and 6 weeks apart, timed to look like nothing instead of everything. The trust document dated 4 months before Robert's death, revised during a stretch when 3 separate people in this room, including Judith herself, had told me his health made long conversations exhausting. The dormant account. The transfers. Diane Foster's statement, read aloud in my own voice because Diane, 81 years old, hadn't wanted to be in the room for this, but had given me permission to say every word of it on her behalf. "She remembers your husband's hands shaking," I said quietly, "when you told him where to initial." The room had gone completely silent. Claire's phone was in her lap, forgotten. Warren had stopped writing on his legal pad entirely, letting the silence do what his notes couldn't. Judith's hand, resting on the arm of her chair, had gone very still. "This is exactly what I expected from you," she said, and her voice found that old crack again, right on cue, right in the place it had always worked before. Twisting a grieving woman's private decisions into some kind of federal case. "I buried my husband the 41 years, and instead of grieving with this family—" She turned to Benjamin, and her voice softened into something almost pleading. "Is this really what you want? Your marriage, your career, your father's memory, all of it turned into evidence because your wife can't leave her job at the office?" It was the same move she'd made at the memorial, the same one that had worked every time before. I watched Benjamin's jaw tighten, and for one held breath, I genuinely didn't know which way he'd go. "Judith." His voice was quiet, but it cut through hers for the first time in his entire life. "Just answer the question." She looked at her son like he'd struck her. Nobody in that room had ever seen Benjamin interrupt his mother before. I don't think Judith had either. She turned back to me, and I watched her reach for the only weapon that had ever worked. "People only remember," she said, "the version of the truth that's left standing." I'd waited months without knowing I was waiting to hear her say that sentence to my face instead of about me behind a closed door. "You're right," I said. "So let's make sure the version left standing is the true one." I opened the folder the rest of the way. I didn't raise my voice once. I didn't need to. I laid out every account, every date, every independent record that had survived her efforts to erase it, and I let Warren confirm, one document at a time, that none of it had come from me making anything up. It had come from banks that don't purge every 7 years, from mail servers that hold on to deletions longer than people think, from an 81-year-old woman who'd carried a small, uncomfortable memory for 4 years because nobody had thought to ask her the right question until now. Judith kept talking. She tried grief again. She tried outrage again. She tried, once, looking directly at Claire and asking her sister-in-law how she could sit there and listen to this. But I watched something happen in that room that I will never forget as long as I live. One by one, the people who had spent months looking at me like I was the problem started looking at her instead, not with hatred, with the particular quiet grief of people realizing they'd been managed for a very long time. One of the cousins, a quiet man named Peter, who'd barely spoken to me since the memorial, finally set down his coffee cup and said, Aunt Judith, you told me that account was closed before I ever asked Alexandra a single question about it. How did you know I'd ask? Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. The silence that followed said more than any accusation I could have made. Nobody defended her, not one person in that room. She sat back in her chair finally, and for the first time in the 2 years I'd known her as a widow, Judith Pierce had absolutely nothing left to say. What followed wasn't dramatic in the way people expect these things to be. There was no shouting, no one storming out. Warren explained calmly that the documented inconsistencies would need to go through the probate court, that a forensic accounting of the estate would now be required, and that certain assets would likely need to be returned to the estate for proper distribution. Legal consequences, he told her gently, were no longer avoidable, given the volume and consistency of independent evidence. Whether criminal charges followed would depend on the state's attorney, not on any of us in that room. Judith didn't look at me on the way out. She looked at Benjamin, and for just a moment I saw something almost like fear cross her face, not of the law, I think, but of losing the one person whose loyalty she'd never had to fight for before. He didn't go to her. He stayed beside me. The months after weren't simple. Some relatives came back slowly, embarrassed, apologizing in small ways for things they'd never say out loud directly. Peter started calling to check in on Sundays the way he used to before all of this started, like he was trying to make up for months of silence one phone call at a time. Claire and I are close again, closer than before, in the particular way people get close after they've watched each other survive something. A couple of cousins never fully came back, and I made peace with that. Judith's sister still doesn't speak to me. I don't think she ever will, and I've stopped needing her to. The probate court proceedings took the better part of a year. The forensic accounting confirmed everything Warren had already suspected the night I sent him that first file. Assets moved, records altered, decisions made on Robert's behalf during a period when he could no longer meaningfully consent to them. The estate was eventually restored and distributed the way Robert had actually intended, back before anyone started rewriting his wishes for him. Judith kept her home. She lost almost everything else, including, I think, the one thing she valued more than any of it, the version of herself everyone in that family had always believed in without question. Benjamin and I are still rebuilding, one honest conversation at a time. He tells me now, when something is hard, instead of going quiet and hoping it disappears. I've learned to ask questions earlier, before silence gets the chance to calcify into something worse. I used to believe that loving my family meant keeping my two lives separate. The investigator locked outside the front door every time I came home. I don't believe that anymore. I believe now that real love sometimes asks you to bring everything you are into the room, even the parts you were taught to leave outside. Judith once told me, people only remember the version of the truth that's left standing. She just never expected that version to be mine. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more real family stories like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this isn't the last time truth had to fight its way back into a family that almost buried it. I'll see you in the next one.